Okay. Great. Well, it's noontime now, so I think we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Liam Gallagher. I'm the current president of the Labor and Employment Relations Association of Maine. I'm also the assistant town manager and HR director for the town of Scarborough. Before we get to introductions and for today's program, just a bit of housekeeping. If you are an attorney looking for CLE credit, if you could put your bar number in the chat so that we can record that and record your credits, that would be much appreciated. And at the end of the program, we'll give you a preview of our next 3 programs and dates so people can mark their calendars. But with that, we're going to get right into today's session, which is expected to run about an hour. The session is entitled Functional Labor Management Relationships. And we're pleased to have 2 speakers from the Auburn Fire Department and our moderator guiding the conversation today. So first, we'll start with Lieutenant Tyler Arsenault. Tyler is a lieutenant with Auburn Fire Department and has been for the last 13 years. Tyler currently serves as the president of the Auburn Professional Firefighters Local 797. Promoted to lieutenant in 2023, he has been deeply involved in union leadership, previously serving 2 terms as secretary before being elected president in 2025. Tyler is known for his collaborative approach to bargaining, his role in securing a 3-year contract, and his commitment to improving working conditions and professional standards for Auburn's firefighters. Additionally, we have Chief Robert Chase. I believe you go by Bob. Chief Chase leads the Auburn Fire Department, overseeing 64 full-time personnel across 3 stations and roughly 5,000 annual emergency responses. His tenure is focused on modernizing operations, advancing firefighter health and wellness initiatives, and guiding major infrastructure planning, including the move to a temporary facility ahead of the city's new public safety building. Named the Maine Fire Chief Association Chief of the Year in 2024, Chief Chase is recognized for his leadership, collaboration, and forward-looking approach to public safety. And lastly, our moderator this afternoon, Lieutenant Carl Anderson. Carl, in addition to serving on the board of Maine LERA, is a lieutenant with the Rockland Fire Department, where he has served for over a decade in operations, fire prevention, and life safety code enforcement. In addition to his departmental role, Carl represents more than a dozen fire unions across the Mid-Coast and Central Maine regions as a district vice president of the Professional Firefighters of Maine. His work focuses on strengthening labor management relationships, improving contract language, and supporting fair, collaborative problem solving between unions and municipalities. So welcome to our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Carl.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Liam. Welcome, everybody. So just wanted to give a brief little introduction here. When this subject came up about labor management, anybody who is in any sort of municipality role or even a labor role, and I'm sure for just everybody in general, can understand that the joining of labor and management together is absolutely vital to anything happening. Long gone are the ways of having to go through stifling procedures and different routes to enhance the unfortunate reputation that different labor and management relationships have had in the past. And now a lot of things can be done with a handshake, just like they should be. When this subject came up, one of my favorite places I like going to is in Auburn. Not only do they have some good coffee shops and lunch places on the way, it's usually I end up pretty happy when I leave. And overall, to be able to call a town manager or an assistant town manager or a fire chief in my role is very, very few and far between. And luckily, with Tyler representing the body and the chief representing the department in the city, we have leaps and bounds over anything that I've done, and I actually use it as a model for things going forward. That's immediately why I thought of these 2 gentlemen to help with our conversation today. So basically, our goal is to share practical experiences from labor management. We're gonna, try to guide the flow as much as we can and keep us on schedule. but I believe that Liam did a good job with the introductions. So I'd like to kind of walk right into some questions for our panel, and then if we do have questions, just throw them in the chat, or we're going to wait till later on, and we'll try to get to all those different things. I'm going to leave this off just because I know my bread's buttered, so I'm going to ask the chief first. When it comes to the biggest barrier in trust, what do you feel that it defines in labor management? What is, the biggest barrier to getting that trustful relationship between labor and management for you, chief?
I think there's a couple of things. I think certainly coming into an organization, and I've now been with Auburn for 8 years, but as you come into an organization, there's history that you need to overcome. I think sometimes history leads to or can lead to an us versus them type of mindset. And so as an individual or a new chief or even a new executive board on the union comes in, I think that we have to have an open mind and think about, it's a whole new relationship that needs to be built based on the interactions of today and not what's happened in the past. I think, a lot of times that history can build a culture of, like I said, us versus them, or I don't quite see the angles yet. And so you have to overcome that. So I think building trust and overcoming, past history, and that comes through openness. One of the things I've always tried to tell, and Tyler has heard me say this, is I don't want there to be any surprises, right? So, but I also tell the EBs when we start that I talk through problems. What I mean by that is, as things are coming up, I need sounding boards, and using that EB as a sounding board is a huge piece toward transparency and openness. And I think ultimately it helps build trust because it eliminates that shock and awe that there's something that they haven't heard before that might be coming. And so, yeah, I guess I would say, overcoming that history and trying to build some level of transparency so that you can talk through problems rather than a sense that that everything is negotiable, right? In a lot of cases, it's more, hey, we need to get something done. There are a lot of ways to skin this cat. Let's start working collectively at it.
Good point, Chief. And for those in the audience that don't understand the hierarchy, basically the way it works, at least in most fire departments, at least union ones, there obviously is a fire chief, and then he has different subordinates below him. Tyler obviously is a officer with the department, but he also represents the union. And when things happen that are coming up that have to do with any of the collective bargaining agreements that we follow, there is procedure that we go through, and they bring the professional firefighters of Maine in as a kind of a sounding board and a guidance to help go forward and make things nice and easy. And so for whatever it is, for negotiations, grievances, or just normal conversations, that's kind of how this is going back and forth. So Tyler, to you, the chief talked about trust and how the history is there. You've been there for a long time.
Yep.
And you've seen a lot of people come and go. What do you think? What do you think? Like helps you to bridge that barrier of trust?
For us, like the chief said when he's talking about the open communication with talking through problems, not necessarily taking it as gospel when we talk, having it out not in the open, but between us, and working through these problems. I think the way we're looking at it now versus the way we have looked at it is definitely built more trust versus, hey, the chief just said this is the direction we're going. That's not the case with this executive board. For us to be able to create an executive board that is on the same page and also has the same vision that aligns, with the city or an admin. I definitely think it helps create more of a trust and allows us to actually get things done and move along.
Tyler, do you feel that you have to guide some of your members? Because obviously there's, with that amount of members that you're representing, there's going to be a lot of different opinions. Do you feel that you have to somehow, like bring the chief and the municipality's vision and kind of preface it in a different way and kind of guide people into the right thinking mode?
For the most part, it is kind of aligning like that. There's a handful of guys and girls on the floor that, or in the body, that you're not going to change their mind. They're set in their way. They don't want to see the progress, change, anything like that. So kind of don't waste your time and emphasis with them. But for the people who might be on the fence with some things, explaining it in a different way, having someone else explain it, has tremendously benefited us. And honestly, to have members on the board that can see different sides and realize we're just one piece of the puzzle has helped out a lot.
Good point. Chief, so, when it comes to these, labor management things, and again, for people who aren't in the business, there's things that are put in the CBA in regards to labor management and how it will be conducted. But to figure out how it's going to be conducted is always a discussion. What do you think, Chief? Like, how often should the communication process be happening outside of the negotiation and official table?
Yeah, I think that's a two-pronged approach. One certainly is as needed, and when I mean as needed, I don't think I mean because an issue has come up, right? If every time we're dealing with each other, it's because there's turbulence or something like that, that's not necessarily the best point. I'll say, that's a two-way street. I've had instances in which, Tyler has come to me, or another member of the EB has come to me and said, "Hey, Chief, I'm hearing some concerns," right? And that hasn't blown up into a big deal yet, but we're getting our finger on the pulse of something that might lead to issues in the future. And similarly, I've gone to the EB or members of the EB and said, "Hey, I need a sounding board. I got an idea. I need to bounce this by you. How will this be received?" Right? So that's on an as-needed basis. And then outside of that, we meet, or at least we have a scheduled meeting monthly. And honestly, if we've had an issue that we just needed to address a week before, we'll go into that scheduled meeting the night before and say, "Hey, is there something more that we need to talk about or not?" But we've have this placeholder on our schedule monthly, because I think it's important. It sometimes gets hard for us as admin to keep a finger on the pulse of the sentiment of the staff. And so having some regular heartbeat or repetition of contact with the union, and I think for us, monthly seems to work as a good point to that, right? We hear what's going on. It's close enough that we can pass along information about what we're working on, so that the staff feels informed, and that can trickle down through. Believe it or not, no matter what I put out for formal communication about what's going on in the department, that isn't always as well received or even as heard as stuff that comes from their peers. And so if we can use that labor management group as a communication conduit, that sometimes is helpful for us just to keep people informed and feeling engaged, and bought into the mission.
So Tyler, everybody is always jealous of the firefighter schedule because we, as hard as it is to be heroes, we work a whopping, 7 to 8 days a month.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to keep that, that on your shoulders. The chief's there 5 days a week, if not more, and he's, finger on the pulse all the time, always, hearing, seeing different shifts, different things, and you're only probably getting stuff from your shift and then maybe hearsay here or there. Do you feel that the monthly meetings that you guys do and the short little conversations here and there, does that work for you?
For the most part, when we're doing the negotiation stuff and the collective bargaining, we get a lot more turnout for our meetings. Right now, we're pretty good with having a representative on almost every shift from the executive board, which is nice. So, not getting complaints and all that, but definitely some topics come up, they get shared throughout we have a group chat, just text here and there. But for the majority, once a month is pretty good, for a union meeting. Knock on wood, we haven't had anything crazy lately, so it's been nice.
Well, listen,
Yeah.
I still need a job, buddy. I mean,
Yeah.
so let's keep this stuff going. So Tyler, to go off of that, when you're looking at negotiations, and we're actually going to look to go into negotiations, and whether it's for a CBA or it's just for a simple MOU or something, what strategies do you personally use to try to keep everything, collaborative between, being the body and the city?
For what I did this past time, and I think it worked pretty well, was I wanted in writing feedback on what the body would like to see for us to negotiate. We collected that, pretty much compared notes with everyone, and then came up with a pretty good package to present to the city. And then one of the biggest things that we utilized was we're not talking about it outside of the executive board, and we were very tight-lipped. I've seen in the past where stuff got out and it just created turmoil. And again, it isn't gospel. You're in negotiations. So really keeping tight-lipped, not sharing things, really helped us out, I think, tremendously in negotiations this time.
So, Chief, you have one of the busiest departments in the state. You probably have certainly one of the top 5 budgets in the state that you've got to keep an eye on. And obviously a lot of people that you have to report to. How but at the same time you have a job to the city and the residents, but also everybody on the floor. How do are there certain strategies that you use to try to keep negotiations collaborative between everybody?
Well, I think that there are strategies. I think one of them is, ultimately, City Hall and Council are those that are going to vote and ratify our portion, our side of that budget, right? So one of the things that I think is important is that, again, it kind of goes back to finger on the pulse, that they're not hearing something first, especially if the union feels it's a very big issue, and it needs to be worked into the CBA, that the first time they're hearing about it is not during negotiations, right? It's hard for me to build support, and a lot of times those are shared interests. And so it's hard for me to build support if something comes out of the blue, right? So keeping a communication with City Hall about the trends in the fire service, things that are going on within the department, health and wellness standards, those types of things, and them hearing those progressively as we go through successive budget seasons or whatever the case might be. I advocate for a lot of stuff that ultimately doesn't make it into the budget, right? But as they start to hear that that's also important to labor, I think that's a good thing. Way better than the fact that it just seems like a out of the dark demand on labor's part during negotiations. So I'd say one of those strategies that I employ is having a little bit of a sense of what is important to the staff and the body, and making sure that the approvers, whether it be council or city hall, might have heard those themes before.
Now, obviously, when it comes to that angle of things, what do you do, or I mean, how personally do you handle if there is a major disagreement, that just can't be bridged, that it's something that you feel passionate about and you just can't come to a compromise on any ends? What where do you go from there?
Just so I understand the question, meaning that there's some kind of issue between administration and the body that we can't seem to bridge, or
Yeah, like if there's something that I mean, obviously financials aside, if there's something that comes from the municipality, or just something from yourself that you would really like to see done, because you believe in the vision or you believe in the concept, and it just doesn't seem to be working at the table at all. What do you do when you hit that wall?
I think that every situation's unique, but I think one of the things I will say is very rarely have I ever won a battle the first time I tried. And so, I've found, especially, substantive change in the department or things that you need to do. People are really, firefighters are afraid of, two things: the way things are and change, right? And change scares them more than anything. And so, you bring up an issue and sometimes it takes a little time in the oven to bake, right? And so oftentimes I've found that, you start to float these ideas, you put pressure on it right up to the breaking point, right? The point in which, it's going to be a revolt, and you say, okay, wait a minute, I might need to come back at this in 6 months, right? And maybe I'm taking a smaller piece at it right now, but you're starting to get some talk happening in the body, right? That talk, in my opinion, and actually this is true at the city hall side too, right? Now a discussion can happen. The body starts to kick around the pluses and minuses of what might, what this change might bring for them. It brings forward a lot of clarity of questions in the issue, rather than emotion-driven questions. They're thought-driven questions, right? What ifs that are actually practical. And I think that gives you the chance to take a better swing at it a little further down the road. I think I've been fortunate that I can't think of a lot of examples. I can't think of one right off the top of my head where it was, we've got to do something and we've got to do it now. More, I think good management is a big part of good management is predicting. So leaning forward, thinking ahead, and trying to put actions into place long before they're needed. Trying to make change in an organization long before it's needed because you've predicted it, gives you the opportunity for a couple of tries at the plate to try to get something done.
And for those of you who don't know in the audience, I mean, sometimes they look at the term labor management or something like that as a, more of a relative term to have, these aren't 9 to 5s. The firefighters on the floor are doing 24-hour shifts. So you have to deal with every aspect of both ends. We're sleeping there, we're eating there, we're, going through personal and professional issues there. There's a reason why the contracts are so big, and there's a reason why there's so many meetings, because it's not just a 9 to 5 where we're, you got to deal with one break during lunch and then everybody goes home at 4. This is a 24-hour shift, and the other side of it is, we're not putting boxes together. This is, we're risking our lives all the time. Mental, behavioral, and physical health is always at risk, and trying to keep your finger on the pulse is always changing. And it's certainly tough to bridge the gap. So luckily these guys have done it. So Tyler, I know for a fact that you've come into issues where you've wanted something, whether it be because the body does, or because you personally, and you didn't get what you were, the answer that you were looking for, either out of the body or out of the municipality. What do you do when you hit that wall?
For us, our kind of approach, we don't take it personally. We have tried to reword things and rework it to, meet in the middle somewhere. And if, it gets shot down, it gets shot down. We won't, give up on it, but we understand, and we understand at the end of the day, it is business. But it's for us, if it benefits a majority of the body, then it's good. So we won't lose sleep over, a penny. But if we're getting a lot of the stuff that we, this last time around, we did really well in negotiations, working with admin in the city, and we didn't get everything we wanted, but we got a good contract and it benefited the majority. So, you know, for next time around, we obviously kept notes, and, you know, we may try to die on the hill for a certain topic. So.
So I want to lead into some, you know, conflict and problem solving, but I need to make sure, are you guys in the same building at the moment?
No.
Oh, okay,
No.
good. I don't want, you know, anybody walking down the hall and throwing things. You know, so Chief, I when I was writing these questions, I really wanted to get something going, but I mean, so what has been your experience of a mistake that happens that derails the discussions in labor management?
Well, I think, you know, expect when you come to negotiations or trying to resolve issues, you know, I think that the most is at stake during that negotiations period, right? So I think that there's a heightened level of, I don't want to use the term anxiety, but certainly of interest in those issues during negotiations, as opposed to us trying to work through an MOU or a procedural change or something in the organization, but during negotiations. And I think that I think it's two parts. I think really clearly understanding the rights of management is an important piece for both sides, right? What falls in negotiable items versus you know, what is procedural in nature, and what are the rights of management. And I think one of the mistakes that I have made historically, first of all, wasn't stressing that the EB be as familiar with those as I would like, right? But I think also at times with the frustration or the emotion, my failure has been being very blunt and saying, we really don't need to be talking about this. These are management rights. And I think that can be, you know, I've made that mistake. I think that that really puts up a wall or a barrier between the union and management. Ultimately, the point is valid, but I don't think that fosters continued communication very well. Now, I will say, you know, to my defense a little bit, usually when I've gotten to that point, it's after long and deliberate discussion and trying to reach resolution. But I want to thank you for picking that scab.
Well, you know, and to be honest with you, you know, to you know, certainly not your detriment, you know, but probably the exact opposite. I can definitely say that part of my job being, you know, I'm not necessarily moderator, but certainly, you know, the guy, you know, who's in there to try to guide at least, you know, our end of the department. The management rights thing gets lost. You know, at the end of the day, you know, we all who are on the floor and all, you know, the grunts that are producing the product, we have to remember that there still has to be a boss, and we have to remember that there has to be a guy who's taking all of the responsibility and all, you know, there. Nobody's usually calling the boss to tell him he did a good job. It's usually the exact opposite. So it's one of those things where it's still the chief's firehouse, and the chief can do what he wants to do with his firehouse. And far be it from us to tell the chief what he can and can't do at certain times. And that's personally been one of my biggest problems that I've always had dealing with unions, or, you know, the body itself, is trying to teach them, you know, hey, listen, at the end of the day, he's the boss, and that's him. And
I think one of the risks of being, I don't think it's a risk, I think it's a good thing, but the more collaborative you are, right? The more that Tyler and I talk through these things, if both sides don't have a clear understanding of what management rights are, then, you know, the union and the EB doesn't have the understanding that what I'm trying to do is build collaboration so I can make the best possible decision, not necessarily get your vote, right? I want to be sure that I've understood what I'm going to do and the impacts on the whole body. how it's going to be received, how it should be best communicated. Are there things that I can do to dull this so it is less impactful on the staff? I want to understand those things before so I can make the best decision and the best action I can. But that doesn't mean that in all of those cases, it's negotiable, right? And so one of the risks of being collaborative is if the EB doesn't understand that it can be a management right, and it becomes adversarial because they're not necessarily in favor of that action. And so I think there's a lot of value in both sides. Clearly, I think management can make a lot of faux pas and mistakes of overstepping their bounds, right? And taking a posture of, I'm the chief, and tapping that badge and saying I can do what I want, and not understanding that if it impacts, negotiable things, working conditions, and how things affect working conditions is a very large gray scale, right? And needs to be interpreted. So management can have the same faux pas, but I think having that strong understanding of that line of what management rights are and aren't is an important part of collaboration.
So Tyler, the chief says he's the boss, and and you gotta take it now. So it's been said in a Zoom and it's been recorded. How so in your opinion, obviously that's a pretty huge point. What when you're in discussions with either the municipality or even your own shift, what is a common mistake that happens that you see happening, repeatedly, that you would like to, fix?
From what our guys on the floor think is right or wrong, or
Sure. And then when you bring it to, the boss, what is it coming from either your end or the municipality's end that, seems to happen often that you feel, kind of derails things and kind of screws things up?
I would say from the body side, grievances that aren't actually against the contract. It's more of personal feelings. Because we obviously, as a body or a board, have to discuss them, look into them and all that. And then at the end of the day, when it's like, well, there was nothing against the contract that was grievable, it's just your personal feelings. It kind of ties up time that we could be actually moving forward with a topic that was discussed in labor management. And then obviously having to get back to that person who thought they were grieved. I think that having our body understand the contract inside and out, and really pushing that has been kind of a struggle and kind of a misstep with the body or with the union, from that side. And from the administrative side, municipality side, really haven't run into too many problems.
Good save.
Wise. So
well, speaking of no problems, I mean, can you think of a time where, some sort of a conflicting incident happened that you had to bring it to labor management and it was resolved effectively?
off the
This is
top
when
of
you're
my-
supposed to say yes, of course I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think. Well, I think one of the things out of negotiations was the paramedic language, that we were able to negotiate aside from the contract and make it a successful MOU, where that to me took a lot of trust from the city for them to trust us that we would get it done on our end. And then we were able to work through it through labor management. Yeah, it took, I think, a month and a half maybe to seal it up and then pass it. So for me, that was a big stepping stone for the executive board, along with working with administration and getting something pretty big done, that we said we were going to get done in a timely manner, and have hopefully some good success with it. So
yeah. For context, this was an issue that we had brought forward, as management had brought forward for a change, right? The creation of a new position that diverged pretty significantly from other positions that we had, and we brought it forward during negotiations. And it certainly was a passionate issue. There was a lot of desire on both sides, or passion on both sides, I should say, but also something that probably needed more time and development to work through the bugs on, right? And I think, to Tyler's point, I think we as a, and Carl, you were part of this, negotiations had progressed pretty well. And last thing we wanted was to, if you will, spoil the water on something that probably just needed a little bit more collaborative work to work out the details on. And so it took trust, I think, on both sides. Ultimately, what we did is within the contract, we wrote that this would be something we work on through the Labor Management Committee as part of the Labor Management Work Plan, which meant that both sides had the trust that we would actively engage in trying to resolve this issue. But that allowed us to feel comfortable with ratifying that contract and moving all those other important issues forward and solidifying them, while still having some confidence that we could ultimately work on something in the, like Tyler said, the month and a half or 2 months after contract ratification, to get something done. And ultimately, I'm actually really glad we did that. It became, it's going to be a much better product than probably having done it more unilaterally as a negotiation proposal. This collaborative thing, I think we're still going to have some hiccups along the way, but I think that it's a way better product than what I had initially proposed in negotiations.
And, to the audience, this is, think about, you getting your marching orders from, whoever it is your boss. And then you have to go back to them and tell them that, yes, we're going to handle this outside of this. So I'm putting the trust, what has to do with budgetary concerns, personnel, all these different things. And it was taken away from the negotiation table, where the manager is also, the guy who's running the city is involved, and the chief and the firefighters are doing it, which is a huge bridge, to think that something as large as new positions, new shifts, new work roles, all these different things, which typically would have been either previously established or been this is how it's going to be. It's actually bringing the advice and thoughts and things through the people who are going to actually execute the plan that the chief has. And the chief, told the, city that I trust this process, and, kudos to both parties involved, because the municipality trusted the labor management process enough to take a pretty big, let's be honest, Auburn's pretty big. It's pretty busy. And to be able to do this and to create things and to, actually have like a budgetary impact and have it be in the hands of, the chief of labor management, it's few and far between. Let's be honest. I mean, traditionally you go into negotiation sessions and you're dealing with money and certain things that probably, at the end of the day, the city manager or the people who live in the community, probably really don't care that much about, other than the money part. And this is a huge part that, that the chief, brought to labor management and now is creating something. So, I mean, it's a great path to start to push down that other people can walk on. So specific to, our business, because, it is certainly, it's becoming more prevalent, now more than any time, with staffing shortages, with, people not, being around to handle these things, mandatory overtimes coming up, all these, different SOGs and SOPs are coming through all the time to try to handle things and try to, twist and move and try to handle things on the fly that we've been doing. How do you handle all these, ever-changing environments of, losing some of your core things? 10, 15 years ago, no such thing as a staffing shortage. You put the job out there and you'd get 150 applications. And if anything, you had too many. And now it's short. And then even with the short staff that you have now, there's an increase in the need of the product. How do you handle, these issues and then, bring them to, the labor management and try to figure out a problem. Tyler, I'll let you start. You see it firsthand, and you see it from a different angle. You see it because you guys are the ones who are going to have to pick up the slack, and you're also going to hear the woes and the things about picking up the slack, but you're also going to hear about the lack of personnel and the lack of people there and the mandatory things that you have to do. How do you keep the faith and keep the good face on when you have to meet with the chief and put the trust in him that it's all going to get better, or there's a plan for it to get better?
Again, the chief does a really good job at keeping good numbers. So for him to be able to show, hey, we have this many calls during this this time, and then we work on creating a program that is outside the norm to help assist in that call volume, has been a really good thing. Right now we're staffing a third ambulance part-time during the day for the busy call hours. So for us to be able to explain to the body, like, hey, we are running this many calls during this many, these hours, this is why we're staffing it. It's going to be, overtime right now, but with the program that we were able to sign for the MOU is going to hopefully assist in, a full-time spot for a paramedic or two to help fill that void where, we're running more EMS calls. So we're trying, the chief and the city are trying to assist in plugging that gap, which also allows us to get more training time, to workload distribution, all the things that we are very passionate about. But we obviously have to keep a good attitude and trust the process.
Chief, do you I mean, you're seeing it on a completely different angle. You're going home with the weight of that on your shoulders. Whereas, a lot of these guys are, when they clock out at 7 a.m., they're just happy that the day's over and they can go home and, just relax. But you have to bring it home. How do you keep the torch lit between you and the body to, with all of these problems and, no foreseeable fix?
Yeah, I mean, the staffing, the staffing challenge itself, I actually, there's a little bit of solace in the fact that I know we're not alone. And what I mean by that is it's pretty universal across the fire service nationwide. I go to nationwide conferences, everybody's having the same struggles. Everybody's trying to take the same paths to achieve that. And I think that helps. As an organization, we don't feel like the pariahs, right? There's something wrong with us. Everybody's struggling with this. And I think that builds a little bit of an understanding on both management and labor's part. We've been very engaged in having staff members very personally involved in our hiring processes, whether it's through running the CPATs, the physical agility tests. So they see how many candidates are coming in, and then they're part of the interview committees, and they're making recommendations on hiring to me. And I think that is huge in the staff being engaged in trying to solve the problem, but also understanding the scope of the problem, right? Understanding how few candidates we've got, or understanding the lack of qualifications that our candidates do have, and being involved in those hiring decisions so they're vested in it. And I think what that's done is it's brought everybody kind of collectively together, that it's an us problem to solve, not a management problem to solve. And we've got a lot of engagement. Tyler and others are part of our recruiting team, right? So they're going out to job fairs and interacting at voc tech schools and community colleges and trying to recruit for us. And that collaborative, I think we're all working together on the staffing thing. And I'm super sensitive. I mean, it's a problem I'd love to solve. I think what bothers me most is the forced overtime, right? I mean, we're just in a position that almost on a daily basis to maintain the staffing, the minimum staffing levels that we need. Almost daily, somebody's being told at 6 o'clock during their shift that they're stuck tomorrow for another 24-hour shift. And that, it bothers me. And I know I get to go home, but there are a lot of guys, there's 1 or 2 or 3 guys or girls every day that isn't going home when they had expected it and probably had planned. So I think we're all collectively, certainly the staff is vested because they don't want to see that anymore, but I am too. It's more than a budget thing; it's a quality of life thing. And honestly, if we don't improve that collectively together soon, I'm going to have bigger problems, right? Because people aren't going to like this as a profession. And so I don't have the silver bullet answers on that. I think we've got a lot of resources going toward it. This tool of trying to hire, a couple of paramedics is part of that, right? It's a dynamic way, and that's what was a hard sell. But we've historically hired paramedic firefighters, and just because of recruiting, I need to fish in a bigger pond. I need to find some candidates to fill some of the roles. And again, it's through the union, and they advocated for their staff's needs very well during this process. That it's very protective of this one position to meet our increased call volume, but that we're broadening that and hiring one or two paramedic onlys that won't have firefighter responsibilities, because I'm hoping there's a bigger candidate pool there to allow me to get some staff in and reduce these daily forces.
And for those of you in the chat there who don't, mandatory overtime, which we or forced overtime, what we talk about is legitimately, yes, we are only working probably 8 shifts a month. It's 24-hour shift, and to find out today that the day that you're on shift, that, oh, by the way, you have to work 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. the next day tomorrow, and it's your son's first birthday, and guess what, you're gonna miss it. And the worst part is there's a list for your forced overtime list, and what happens when you do it is you go to the bottom, but as things happen, you keep making your way back up, and you could be forced again at some point. That's the challenge that you take, and hopefully we can try to make it so that those things don't happen. But that's certainly something that's in regular work world, 9 to 5 world, that certainly doesn't happen. And if it does, it's not to that level by any means. But
Carl, can I add one thing to that?
oh yeah, please. Yeah.
So through labor management, we were able to identify that forces were a huge problem for us, and we've tried to come up with some solutions that have, I think, eliminated some of the forces. Obviously, we're still going to have forces, but we were able to collaboratively come up with an agreement on pre-scheduling our overtime. So that was a change in our contract or hiring rules for overtime, where we allow firefighters to sign up if there's a known vacancy. So that is hopefully has, I think, eliminated some forces, and it makes it a little easier for our firefighters to schedule their lives outside of work. So obviously it's not perfect, but again, through labor management, it was kind of a step in the right direction. So
yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, everybody has to remember there's, it's time and money. That's what makes, anybody move. And, it's, money's great and everything like that, but time is pretty darn important. So, when the grass isn't greener, let's just say, this is, like the chief said, this is happening everywhere. I want to give everybody in the chat a chance, or anybody to, ask a question. Liam, should I just kind of turn it over to the people in the audience there to see if they have any questions?
Sure, I think that'd be fine, Carl. Also, people can either raise their hand or just populate a question in the chat. I'm about to send one over the chat if you want to take a look at that one to get things started.
Okie dokies. No pressure, guys. No pressure. So, you guys can see it, so you can kind of cheat a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to tee it up too. I put it in the chat for everyone's, but essentially my question is for Chief Chase. So it sounds like you and Lieutenant Arsenault have a pretty functional relationship together, and I'm sure that through that relationship, there's a level of candidness and honesty you can have when you're working through probably specifically personnel challenges. From your experience, Chief, can you think of a time when you didn't have such a collaborative relationship with labor and how that maybe impacted some negative outcomes?
Never.
Yeah, I sure can. Relationships are always a two-way street. And honestly, I don't have to go back very many EBs to think about times when I think that both parties have to go into that new relationship and without an agenda, right? Or if you have an agenda, and what we've collectively shared as our agenda is we're trying to provide the highest level of public safety that we can, and if we can agree on that as the agenda and that's the driving factor, then I think we've done good. A couple of EBs ago, we were going into negotiations. And the members that got on the EB, right, hadn't been active for a very long period, hadn't been active in the EB at all historically, got on for those negotiations, and the agenda wasn't acting in the interest of public safety or in the benefit of the department. It was very selfish, if you will. And now, again, I'll acknowledge that any relationship is a two-way street, and I probably had things that I could have done to have built that better. But what I will say is I don't necessarily think that it's just because Lieutenant Arsenault and I have built an amicable relationship. I think that has come because we both went into it with the right mindset, which is we got to do the best for public safety. How we get there is going to differ. There are going to be things that he finds important. But if we go back and if he can recognize that I'm doing the things I'm doing in the interest of public safety, and I can recognize that he's doing the same things, it keeps, he mentioned earlier, we don't take it personal. It keeps that personal piece out. It keeps the sense that one's out to get the other out of it. And we don't agree on everything. We've gone through long roads, but at least we can certainly agree that I can see why they're advocating for what they're advocating for, even if I don't agree with it, and that it's serving, in their eyes, it is serving the common mission we have, which is, public safety or the betterment of the department. And so I don't know how you instill that into somebody that doesn't naturally have it, other than state it when you start the relationship, and hope that they get on board, and then honestly grit your teeth and bear it out if that doesn't work, I think is, and we've had to do that too. So it seems like a lot of peaches and cream right now, but it hasn't always been that way. And the next EB could shuffle this up a lot too. So it is a fickle thing for sure.
Great. So thanks, Chief Chase. So Lieutenant Arsenault, from your perspective, can you maybe, a different question, talk about how your evolution as a labor rep have you had an evolution in your perspective? Did you come in with a certain bias or perspective on labor management, and have you grown and changed, or do you feel like your perspective on collaboration and understanding the perspective of administration's changed as you've kind of gone through this leadership role?
Oh, yeah, my view has definitely changed. I thought the union ruled the roost. Not that, it's definitely changed, especially working on a previous executive board, and now the executive board I have now. It is a lot different, but it also has taken a lot of work. And realizing that we're just, in the grand scheme of things, we're one piece of the puzzle. And having the ability to view everything else that's going on within the city, within the state, and United, and then the country. Obviously, I'm not a genius with all of it, but having kind of a clue on what's coming down the pipeline can kind of, again, like the chief said, if you can predict it, you'll have a better outcome. So for me, it has definitely changed my view. It is, again, to surround yourself with an executive board that kind of has the same view, you can actually get some stuff done, and it feels good. So thanks.
I don't see any other questions coming through the chat. I guess, I know that I'm not sure if you guys have aligned on a specific success story, but I know, in my experience, again, when you have these sort of trusting relationships with the labor side of things, you can be really, really honest as you work through those personnel challenges and really lay it out, rather than just kind of hold your cards close to the vest and have you just share your perspective and have them share their perspective, kind of acknowledging the challenges that both sides really kind of see with something. Do you have a specific example, without naming names, of a time when you thought that, you know, the relationship that you two have formed has really led to again, a better outcome in a specific example?
Well, I think that there's certainly, I think what we've just recently accomplished with the MOU to created, you know, outside of the negotiation table, to create a new position that kind of helps us with regard to overtime and broadening our horizons and getting a better candidate field, helps labor with regard to you know, the forced overtime and those types of things. That certainly is a success. We've also had some personnel issues, you know, again, not getting in with names, but you know, if we're collectively engaged in discussions on an ongoing basis. Here's things that we see, right? Performance issues that we've seen, and talking through that early. And I think it's like anything, right? If it comes down to a discipline and or, you know, suspension or termination, and that, you know, that's the first that both sides are hearing of it, or that labor is hearing of it. I think that is shock and awe, and there isn't any history there. And so even with personnel and performance issues, the ability to get labor engaged early and say, hey, you know, we're working through a performance improvement plan with an individual, right? They're aware of that. They're aware of those issues. And let's face it, right? These guys, we're not a big enough organization where solely what they do is labor management. In some cases, these are, right? In many cases, they're officers on the floor, right? And so they are knowing early, and a dual, kind of wearing dual hats as an officer in labor management, that, you know, we've got an employee issue. Let's work collectively to save this career, or to do what we need to do to right that ship. But ultimately, if it doesn't get righted, you know, they've been part of that collective piece. And you know, it's not always easy to say, but, you know, they're just, sometimes there are people that aren't right for an organization. And honestly, that comes up best when that is a collective decision. You know, again, it's management rights, don't get me wrong. And but ultimately, if labor is involved with those as we go through, there becomes some, hey, we've provided a lot of opportunity to individuals, they haven't grasped on them. There's, you know, limited options now, right? We've had a few of those instances.
Thank you. Anything to add, Tyler?
No, Chief's right. Just the open communication for those issues, and kind of knowing about it before it becomes a bigger issue has been definitely helpful with creating that trust and keeping that trust. So
Have you found it, again, I'm really fascinated by the labor role in this discussion. Have you found it interesting, Tyler, kind of working with, you know, you probably get the story from the member when you're dealing with a personnel issue or performance issue, and then you might be let in kind of inside the tent with the admin to hear the other perspective. Has that been an enlightening experience for you?
yeah, it definitely has. And again, kind of keeping the you know, not being with the, you know, not going in with the blinders on, and definitely being able to see a bigger picture, and understand both sides, even if there is, you know, multiple sides to it. Just being able to keep an open mind and you know, have a good field of vision.
Great. So I know that the audience is I think a nice mix of certainly a lot of neutrals, but a lot of HR professionals and management side, and some labor side. I guess I would, without any objection from Carl, maybe Tyler and Bob, if you want to leave the audience with any helpful advice to, I think, you know, build on their own healthy labor management relationships. Any final words or of advice?
I think I would say that if and it can come in waves, because again, it's the relationship, and EBs change, and management changes. But if your relationship is primarily adversarial or reactive, the first step is to switch that, right? It's to be proactive, to build bridges, to be open. You can be open on things that may seem relatively inconsequential, but the fact that you're building the dialogue and feeling, you know, empowering the body, helping them feel inclusive in what's going on in the organization, I think that's the first step. You know, certainly, you know, then, you know, you put your best foot forward, right? It's never gonna, you know, you can't always be that the only time you're talking is because an issue's come up and that needs resolution.
Great. And I think, Lieutenant, I think you get the final word.
I think for me is the labor side not going in with a personal vendetta. Again, having an open mind. I was on a previous executive board that was kind of toxic, and Chief Chase could have held it against me as, the union president taking over. So, again, I think having an understanding that you represent, 70 or however many people you represent on the labor side, and that you're not that, you're not that important, and you need to understand you're representing the body, not just you and a few people. So
Great. Well, Carl, any final thoughts from you before we wrap?
You know what? I certainly want to thank, the companies involved here, and state at the end of the day, I can only really speak from the fire service, but we are a brotherhood. And whether you got a white hat or not, whether you're going in or staying out, I think at the end of the day, every job can come down to you can be friends, and it's okay, and it's to look at labor management as two different words. It's because it has to be two different words, but when you get into the room or when you are just out and about, it doesn't have to be. Chiefs are scary, some of them. Town managers are scary, some of them. But in the end, they're people, and chances are they were in your shoes. Chances are they were, fighting the beast and barking down the hallway and picking up the patients. So they know what you went through, and they're trying to take care of you in the end. So I would, no matter what the business is, I think labor management doesn't always have to be just two separate words. We're all fighting the same fight.
Great. Great. Well, thank you all to our panelists, Chief Chase, Lieutenant Arsenault, and Lieutenant Anderson for your time and contributions today. Just before we head out, bit of housekeeping. Our next program will be January 12th. The tentative or the working title is Political Impacts and Court Decisions, Impact on Labor Relations. The program following that will be March 9th, and we'll have our last program of this year on May 11th. So mark your calendars for those, and we'll get information out as we have it available. So thank you all for your attendance today, and thank you again to our panelists, and we'll see you in a few months.
Thank you.